She was supposed to be on her way to the hospital, not fighting for her life on her own front lawn. When the contractions hit, we thought the worst was over. But then came her, the HOA president, clipboard clutched like a weapon, screaming about violations. Within seconds, everything spiraled out of control. The taser crackled, my wife collapsed, and the neighborhood froze in disbelief. By the time the police arrived, the story had twisted beyond reason, and the judge's words would change everything. How did a suburban rule dispute turn into a national headline about domestic terrorism? Drop your location and comment. Let's see how far this story reaches around the world. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off every mailbox on our street. Neighbors peeked through curtains as officers taped off the driveway where my wife had fallen. Someone whispered, "They're saying it was domestic terrorism." The words hung heavy in the air, echoing through a neighborhood that suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. By morning, the story was everywhere. Our quiet cul-de-sac turned into a symbol of everything wrong with suburban culture. The morning always began the same way, sunlight bouncing off the neat rows of identical mailboxes, sprinklers hissing like clockwork across manicured lawns. Ours was a small cul-de-sac where everyone waved, but nobody really talked, the kind of place where the HOA newsletter arrived before your welcome letter, and every flower bed looked like it had passed inspection. For my wife and me, this was supposed to be the perfect start to our next chapter. Quiet streets, good schools, neighbors who smiled just enough to feel safe. She was 8 months pregnant, glowing and determined to turn our modest house into a sanctuary before the baby came. But before the nursery was even finished, warning signs began to appear. The HOA president, a woman who seemed to live for clipboards and confrontation, had a habit of showing up unannounced. Sometimes it was about our trash cans being visible from the street. Other times, about a car parked half an inch over the curb. Every conversation started polite and ended with a veiled threat about community standards. At first, I brushed it off. Everyone said she was harmless, just strict. But as my wife's due date crept closer, the visits became more frequent, the letters more aggressive, and the tone unmistakably personal. Then one evening, a new notice appeared taped to our front door. Bright red, bold letters across the top. Final warning, it wasn't about trash cans or lawns this time. It accused us of unauthorized modification of driveway. Parameters. I had painted a small white line to show guess where to park. But to the HOA, it was defacement. The message demanded removal and threatened a $250 daily fine. That afternoon, I scrubbed paint off concrete under the blazing sun, wondering how we'd become targets over something so trivial. The next morning, another envelope arrived. Our porch light was too bright. I replaced the bulb. It didn't matter. Each citation bore the same signature, Karen L. Patterson, Community Integrity Officer. Neighbors began avoiding eye contact. Conversations stopped. When we walked by, a few whispered that Karen had it out for us, that she'd called extra board meetings just to discuss non-compliance, trends. I started documenting everything, photos, timestamps, and copies of letters. My wife thought I was paranoid until the day she came home in tears. Karen had cornered her in the driveway, pointing at the garden hose near the walkway, accusing her of unsanctioned landscape equipment. My wife, 8 months pregnant, stood there clutching groceries while being lectured about a hose. That night I emailed the entire board, attached evidence, and demanded clarification. 2 days later came the reply. The board stands by the citations. Continued defiance may result in community-level escalation. Community-level escalation. It sounded ridiculous, but it's like a threat. 2 weeks later, a certified letter arrived, claiming we owed over $1,000 in fines. Failure to comply could result in a lien on our property. We weren't even behind on dues then. The HOA called an emergency session. Karen sat at the head of the table, framed by the HOA logo like a queen before her subjects. When I walked in, the room fell silent. She began reading from her notes. We're here to address escalating incidents involving Mr. Carter and his household, I interrupted, voice shaking. She tased my pregnant wife. Gasps filled the room. Karen didn't. Flinch. Self-defense, she said calmly. She played edited footage, trimmed, distorted, showing only me shouting. The taser flash was cropped out. It was surreal. The board voted unanimously. Suspended pending investigation. When I returned home, a neighbor was waiting in the dark. Greg Miller, retired, quiet. He slipped me a small flash drive. "Cameras caught everything," he whispered. "Before it disappears, that night, I watched the footage. Greg's security camera faced the street, capturing the entire attack. No self-defense, no provocation. Just Karen raising her arm, firing, my wife collapsing. I sent the video to the police, the HOA board, and a journalist. 2 days later, it went public. The headline hit every news feed. Toy president uses taser on pregnant resident. The footage spread like wildfire. Within hours, our house was surrounded by cameras. Reporters called it HOA gone rogue. Karen held her own press conference at the clubhouse, draped in an American flag backdrop, declaring, "I acted in defense of community safety." Her followers stood behind her, nodding solemnly. Meanwhile, our inbox filled with threats. "Move before it gets ugly. We know where your wife works. The police said they'd look into it. They didn't." Then came the thick envelope. The HOA had filed a lien on our home, charging us for property damage from the incident. They were billing us for their own violence. I snapped, posted everything online, emails, videos, and board minutes. Title, "When Your HOA Becomes a Cult." It went viral overnight. The courtroom was colder than I expected, not in temperature, but in the silence, the kind that settles deep into your chest, waiting for something to crack. The air conditioner hummed faintly above the ceiling lights, and every creak of a chair echoed like thunder. Karen sat across from us, her red blazer immaculate, her hair tied tight. In a severe bun, you could mistake her for a corporate executive. If you didn't, know the story behind her. Eyes. She glanced at me once, expression unreadable, almost smug. Beside her, her lawyer whispered something that made her smirk. My wife sat beside me, holding our newborn's picture in trembling hands. She hadn't slept in days, but when the clerk announced the case number, she straightened her back and took a deep breath. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was a mother, demanding justice. The prosecutor's voice cut through the quiet. "Your Honor, this is not a story about property rules. This is a story about power, control, and cruelty, hiding behind a neighborhood sign." He played the footage, Greg's security camera, angle, the screen, flickered. Karen's figure appeared, stepping forward, taser raised. Wife screamed, the flash, the collapse. The camera caught everything, her shock, her pain, and the chaos that followed. You could hear people in the gallery gasp. Even the judge leaned forward, his jaw tight. When the lights came back on, the room was heavy. The defense tried to argue protocol breach and community safety, but when the prosecutor read aloud the HOA emails, the fabricated citations, the threats, it became clear this wasn't about rules, it was about control. Finally, my wife took the stand. Her voice trembled, but she didn't waver. "When she tased me," she said, "I wasn't just in pain. I felt erased. Like my home, my family, my safety. None of it mattered to her. Because she had power, and I didn't. There were no objections. Just smile.nc. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Karen rose to give her statement against her lawyer's advice. Her tone was calm at first, almost rehearsed. "For years, I've kept this community safe," she began. "People like them think rules don't apply. But without rules, there's chaos. Without leadership, there's collapse." Then her voice sharpened. "You think I'm the villain? I was protecting property values. I was protecting our way of life." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Her lawyer buried his face in his hands. The judge's gavel struck once. Enough. The jury filed back in less than an hour later. No. One looked at Karen. No one looked at us. Just 12 faces carrying the weight of everything that had happened on that street the foreperson stood. We find the defendant, guilty of assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and abuse of authority. My wife's hand gripped mine. Karen froze, eyes wide, lips parted, disbelief etched across her face. As the bailiff took her by the arm, she turned toward me and hissed under her breath, "You'll regret this." They all will, but outside, the crowd was already cheering. Neighbors who once stayed, silent now stood with signs that read, "Justice for the Carters." Cameras flashed. The story that began with silence, ended with noise, raw, deafening vindication. Weeks passed. The headlines faded, but the echoes remained. The HOA board disbanded, their office sealed shut by county order. The same building that once held. Community meetings now stood, hollow, windows dusty, papers scattered inside like ghosts of authority. The sign outside, once reading Maplewood Estates, a proud community, now had the word proud spray-painted over with. Toxic, walking past it. I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the time we lost, for the nights filled with fear, relief that no one would ever have to bow to a clipboard. Again, neighbors started talking. Again, some apologetic, others defensive. One older woman, Mrs. Jenkins, whispered, "We knew she was going too far. We just didn't think she'd snap like that." Mailboxes that once held. Threats now carried baby cards and casseroles. Slowly, painfully, the neighborhood began to breathe again. But every time I passed that old office door, I remembered the woman who thought control was justice, and the cost of proving her wrong. The summer came early that year. The trees bloomed brighter, as if reclaiming what had been stolen. Our porch, once a battlefield of arguments and notices, now smelled of baby, powder and fresh coffee. The sun dipped low over the quiet street, golden light spilling across the roof lines. My wife rocked our son gently, humming the same lullaby. She sang in the hospital. The baby's tiny hand clutched her finger, his eyelids fluttering with dreams, untouched by fear. We didn't talk much anymore about Karen or the HOA. There was nothing left to say, only lessons learned. The sign outside the neighborhood had been repainted by residents themselves. "Welcome home, respect lives here." Sometimes at night, I'd look at the empty office window across the street. Behind the cracked blinds, I swore I could still see the faint reflection of a clipboard and a woman who thought she ruled the world. But then I'd turn back to my wife and son and realize we had taken our world back. She leaned her head on my shoulder, eyes on the fading light. "It's over," she whispered. I looked down the long, quiet road and answered softly, "No, it's finally beginning." The camera would fade. Slowly, porch lights flickering on, the baby's soft breath blending with the night. Final title card appears on screen. Power doesn't build communities. People do.